All right, so we're going to be talking about the essentials of New Jersey Real Estate 13th edition, chapter 7, ownership of real estate. So what we're going to be talking about right here is we're going to be able to define the different ways in which we take title to a property. And then we're also going to be able to define some other forms of ownership. So what we've already discussed in prior chapters is the different freehold estates that we have. So we've spoken about life estates, fee simple, fee defeasible. Okay, those are our freehold estates. We spoke about those. Okay, now we're going to talk about how you can take title. Title is proof of ownership. Okay, so title, which is then transferred by deed, and we'll talk about that when we get into deeds and legal descriptions, is again proof of ownership. Think of it as title to a car. Title to a car is proof of ownership that you have that you own it. Same thing goes with the real estate. Okay, nothing changes there. So let's talk about the ways in which we can take title. So they're referring to it as forms of ownership. So the very first thing that we'll talk about is tenancy and severalty. Tenancy and severalty. Now, what you're probably looking at with this is you're probably saying that it sounds like several, like multiple things. Tenancy and severalty is actually referring to severed interests, which means that this is ownership of one individual or one corporation. Now, I am going to make the distinction that this is a way a corporation can own real estate, okay? They own it themselves, okay? There is no one else involved. There is no other corporation, no other individual, okay? The person who owns it or entity that owns it in severalty has all the rights to that property in regards to however the freehold estate is set up, whether it's fee simple, fee defeasible, fee determinable, life estate, things like that. So if you have fee simple ownership, if you have a fee simple estate or a simple fee estate, fee absolute, and you own it and you take title as tenancy and severalty, you own it individually, okay? You have the right to alienate the property, disposition the property any which way you want, as long as it's legal and lawful. Okay. You have the right to devise it, which means to will real property. Devise, D-E-V, as in Victor, I-S-E, devise property. Okay. So tenancy and severalty, the way you take title in that is one individual, one corporation. Tenancy in common is going to refer to multiple individuals or multiple corporations, okay? This is the last way in which a corporation can own real estate. Okay? So, and you'll understand when we get into the benefits of joint tenancy and tenancy by the entirety. We're not there yet. So let's continue talking about tenancy in common. Tenancy in common allows for unequal ownership in the property. So let's say I have a business partner. He goes 70% in on the amount that we paid for the home. I go 30. We can own the property 70-30. Okay. We can own this property 70-30. All right. Now, you could also have joint tenants in common, take the property at different times. So let's say someone wants to buy into the property. You could do that. That's not a problem. With tenancy in common, there's a little more fluidity in regards to it because there is no real requirements for tenancy in common other than it is a form of ownership, a way that you take title to a property that is other than being individual, okay? So here's what happens is if someone dies and doesn't actually, you know what? I'm not going to get into death in this one because we're going to talk about that in joint tenancy. So if something were to happen where a tenant in common were to sell their interest in the property or devise it, will it to someone else, they would now be tenants in common with the other person, okay? But for whatever reason, if the person who was tenants in common or the corporation was tenants in common with the other individual and or corporation became one owner, it would default. You would actually then have tenancy and severalty, because you can't have tenancy in common with one person, because then that would actually be tenancy and severalty. Okay, so we have to make sure that we know that differentiation. So that's where your corporations will, your LLCs, LLPs your incorporated companies will live, die, eat, and breathe. Eat and breathe. Thank you. Joint tenancy. Let's talk about this. Okay. Joint tenancy is two individuals. They must meet the requirements of what we call the four unities. Okay. The four unities, I refer to them with an acronym called T-TIP. T-TIP. The four unities to create joint tenancy is TTIP. The unity of time, the unity of title, the unity of interest, and the unity of possession. T-TIP. Okay? What do I mean by the unity of time? They must take title at the same time. Title, the unity of title. They must have taken title on the same title. So it can't be a new title that was drawn up, anything like that. Unity of interest. Okay. They must have equal interest in the property. Okay. So this could be two individuals, three individuals, four individuals, whatever the case may be. They must have equal shares in the property. This will not allow for unequal shares. Unity of possession, they are possessing the property at the same time. So they're taking possession of it at the same time. Okay? So if all those are met, you can create joint tenancy. Okay? Joint tenancy offers you one beautiful thing that other forms of ownership do not, other than tenancy by the entirety, and that is the right of survivorship. What is the right of survivorship? I'm glad you asked that. The right of survivorship is this. If one or more of the individuals dies, or something, God forbid, happens to them, yes, there actually is no other option other than death in this one, in this example. So if they die, their ownership dissolves into the remaining owner or owners. Okay, this protects people. So I'll give you a perfect example. My wife and I, at the time we purchased our home, we were engaged. So we were not married. Okay. And we wanted to make sure that if something were to happen to one or both of us, you know, that the other one would be protected. Okay. So if one of us passes away, we want to make sure that one of us would be protected on this. So what we did was we created joint tenancy, so that if I pass away, my ownership of the property dissolves into my wife's interest. And if she dies, it dissolves into mine. Okay? Now, tenancy by the entirety. If we understand joint tenancy, tenancy by the entirety is very simple. Tenancy by the entirety, some people, some real estate professionals refer to this as joint tenancy plus unity of the people. Okay? Meaning you have to be married at the time you take title. So all other things have to remains true. So everything from joint tenancy has to stay the same, you know, so you need the unity of time, title, interest, and possession. So you have to take it at the same time, all that stuff. And you have to be married at the time. Now, the interesting thing about this is that for married people, tenancy by the entirety is the default. If you are married at the time you take title, tenancy by the entirety is the default. If you are more than one person, okay, and you're taking title to a property, tenancy in common is the default, unless you specify joint tenancy. That's for your attorney to work out, or, you know, if you know what the story is, you can. I would avoid giving advice on this one, because you do not want to seem like you are giving legal advice, right? We're not really going to go into the exact business ownerships, but understand that the only ways that business ownerships can own real estate in the state of New Jersey is either tenancy in severalty or tenancy in common, because they cannot die. So the right of survivorship just would never take place. So they cannot take part in that benefit, right? Now, we have to talk about condominiums, co-ops, and timeshares. So let's talk a little bit about a condominium, okay? Because we're painting this beautiful, beautiful picture of ownership. So we talk about our freehold estates. We now know how you take title to a property. So now we're going to talk about condominium ownership, because you could have something fee simple, own it as a tenancy in severalty by yourself, and then it could also be condominium ownership. Well, Stu, what the heck is condominium ownership? Let me explain. Condominium ownership, you receive a deed. You own real property, okay? You typically own interior wall to interior wall, meaning that you usually do not have the responsibility and or ownership of the exterior of the property, okay? So you usually do not have that as an expense, as a benefit, anything like that. So what happens is condominiums usually don't go that crazy in price because they do have common elements. You're not owning a single family home. So in a traditional market, the single family home should be more expensive than that of a condominium, okay? Now, a condominium can look like a single family home, okay? Because when I say condominium ownership, some people automatically go, a condominium is a single one level that looks like an apartment. No, we use that kind of as slang in real estate to identify a property, to say, oh, that's a condo. Yes, it is, but also condominium ownership is a form of ownership in addition to everything else that we have. It's that ice cream sundae I keep referring to, you know. So you could own something fee simple. You could take title as joint tenants, and then it could be condominium ownership. So it's something that condominium ownership is, you know, very, very good for you to have. And what was I going to say? It could have its advantages because, again, there are also income tax advantages of home ownership. It gives you an affordable, in most areas, option versus single family living, right? So that's something that you want to definitely know and understand. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about is cooperative ownership. Cooperative ownership. What is a co-op? Do you own real estate? No, you do not. You receive stock in a proprietary lease. So you own shares in a corporation. So it'll be corporation built a lease, a proprietary lease for a unit when you purchase the stock for that unit, okay? So you will receive stock and a proprietary lease, okay? You do not own real property. So this is actually transferred through a bill of sale, because what you own is chattel. You own personal property. You own personalty, okay? And as we've discussed in prior chapters, personalty is transferred through bill of sale, okay? So this also has some income tax advantages as well. But something else that you want to know about this is that typically the maintenance fees are exorbitantly high on this, and people usually get steered away from this. But they don't understand that because you do not own real estate, your taxes are rolled into your monthly maintenance fee. Your heating, cooling, all that stuff that cannot be put into your name because you do not own real estate is rolled into the maintenance fee typically. Also, the board of directors has to approve every single tenant or owner that comes into the building. So that sometimes does create a little bit of an issue. We typically do not see many co-ops in New Jersey. This is more your metro areas, your major metro areas, Manhattan. A lot of co-ops in Manhattan. Why? Because typically co-ops do not skyrocket in price because you do not own actual real estate. You own shares in a corporation. So what happens is it usually doesn't skyrocket in price. So you're not going to really be getting a massive amount of equity, but you do get to live in some areas that, you know, you usually would not be able to. Okay. Now, they're talking about townhouses as an architectural style. Yeah, Condominiums, townhouses, those are slang for architectural styles. That's it. So when I'm talking about a condominium ownership, I'm talking about the form of ownership where there's an HOA, a homeowners association, common elements, and you usually own interior wall to interior wall. Okay. So that could look like a single family home. There are a lot of over 55 communities in the state of New Jersey that allow that, that look just like a single family, but they are condominium ownership. Okay. Townhouses, typically people say anything that's connected on two sides or one side and has multiple levels is a townhouse. And that's not entirely inaccurate, but again, it's just strictly an architectural style. It has nothing to do with the form of ownership. Then we also have timesharing, which is a form of basically crowdsourcing ownership where you only own basically a fraction of time in a year to use a property that is also owned by other people. That's really all you need to know about timesharing. You don't need to know much else. And that's chapter 7 in a nutshell.